You have 7 minutes. You may begin. Please state your name for the record as well. Thank you.
Yes, hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colombe Nadeau-O'Shea. Pretty good there on the pronunciation. And I'm delighted to be speaking to you today in strong opposition of Bill 156. Mercy for Animals Canada, which is the organization that I represent, is a Canadian not-for-profit corporation working to create a more compassionate food system. A large part of our work involves exposing some of the worst forms of cruelty on industrial farms by conducting undercover exposés. Currently, the Canadian government minimally regulates the treatment of animals on industrial farms. In the absence of government oversight, exposés serve as the only way to expose harmful industry practices, many of which do not only hurt animals, but involve unsanitary conditions that could impact public health. To date, Mercy for Animals has conducted 12 exposés in Canada. 2 of these exposés have led to criminal charges, while others have prompted corporations to make changes essential to animal welfare, worker safety, and public health. Most of my testimony today will shed light on some of our most impactful exposés, as well as the legal and corporate policy changes they have prompted. Prior to addressing this, I would like to highlight that our goal is not to target farmers, but to protect animals, workers, and public health. In fact, Mercy for Animals has made many unlikely allies in the meat industry and has partnered with many farmers to find viable income streams outside of animal agriculture. In the US, for instance, we are in a pilot year of our transformation program, which aims to get contract poultry farmers out of debt and into growing plant-based foods. I will now go into detail about our Canadian exposés, highlighting what they have revealed about welfare conditions of farmed animals, worker safety, and public health, in that order. As a warning to those listening, many of these exposés display egregious abuse, and the content of my testimony may be upsetting to some. Addressing animal welfare. A Mercy for Animals exposé of Chilliwack cattle sales documented workers kicking, punching, and beating cows in the face and body, using chains and tractors to lift sick or injured animals by their necks, poking and squeezing wounds, ripping out cows' hair, and punching bulls in their testicles. This exposé led to a raid by law enforcement and recommendations of criminal charges against 8 workers on 20 counts of animal cruelty. 6 individuals, as well as the company, were convicted on 10 counts of animal cruelty. Another exposé of Western Hog Exchange showed that Canadian Food Inspection Agency, CFIA, representatives were complicit in abuse, handing prods to truckers to shock pigs. It also showed workers shocking downed animals with prods and beating them to get them to walk, and animals kept in overcrowded pens and suffering heat stroke, heart attacks, broken necks, and broken legs with no veterinary care. The exposé resulted in an internal review of the CFIA to determine whether federal rules had been broken and whether suitable inspections had been conducted. Worker safety. Meatpacking is notoriously hazardous. Often, precautions that ensure occupational health in meatpacking plants reduce profitability on the part of the employer. In recent years, Canadian meatpacking industry has seen an intensified labor process, marked by increased mechanization and production pace and a documented rise in workplace injuries. Whistleblowers also play an important role in protecting workers' rights and ensuring that their places of employment are safe. Public health. Mercy for Animals' Puritone exposé documented thousands of pigs in gestation crates unable to turn around or stand up. It also showed pigs suffering from large open wounds and pressure sores from being confined in these crates, and pregnant pigs with bleeding, distended prolapses. Additionally, undercover video taken at egg farms supplying McDonald's Canada revealed hens crammed inside wire battery cages and dead hens left to rot in cages with live birds. Whistleblowers at Delimax Veal documented calves crammed into crates barely larger than their own bodies, as well as sick and injured animals left to suffer in their own filth with no veterinary care. This revealed egregious instances of abuse, and indeed the Delimax Veal exposé led to criminal charges for animal abuse. But I would also like to highlight the consumer health risks inherent in the industry practices I've just highlighted. Studies have shown that animals raised in confinement suffer increased stress and disease. Likewise, the European Food Safety Authority has found that salmonella is more prevalent in cage egg production than in cage-free, and pigs confined in crates have constant contact with excrement, increasing their risk of infection and disease. Consumers also deserve to know the conditions that animals they consume are raised in, and it is clear that once they know, they demand change. As a result of the exposés outlined above, Canadian retailers agreed to phase out cruel gestation crates from their pork supply chains. McDonald's announced a commitment to phasing out battery cages from its Canadian and US egg supply chains, and the Quebec Veal Producers Federation and Canada's top grocery chains committed to ending the sale of veal from crated calves by 2018. In conclusion, as stated previously, a lack of adequate government oversight ensures that undercover exposés are paramount to enacting much needed change within the industry. Criminalizing the actions of whistleblowers who expose animal abuse would shield industrial farmers from accountability and protect abusers. Instead, Ontario should codify measures that require routine inspections of industrial farms and that regulate acceptable animal welfare conditions. Mercy for Animals Canada urges the Legislative Assembly of Ontario to vote no
You
on
have 1
Ontario's
minute
Article
left.
1.6 and instead put legislative measures in place to ensure animal welfare. Thank you, and that's all I have today.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to the government side for this round of questions. Would anyone like to raise their hand? MPP Pettipies, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. And I'd like to direct my first question to the last speaker, Ms. O'Shea. Is that, or do you say the two together? Nettie?
Nedo O'Shea is preferable, but I will answer to O'Shea.
Nato O'Shea.
Yes.
Okay. What's your definition of an industrial farm?
Industrial farming is any large-scale farming operation.
How large is large?
That I don't have a specific answer in terms of what we would consider a small versus a large farm.
So it can be anywhere from 100 animals to 1,000 animals?
Sorry, can you? I missed the first part of that question.
The 100 animals to 1,000 animals?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a personal definition of what's considered an industrial farm versus a non.
You cited some examples of stock prize being used on animals in your presentation. When was that?
So I am a member of our development department, and as such, I don't have every single detail on our past investigations. I believe the one that mentions the prods, I can go and double check for you. But did you have a question specific to the use of prods or?
Well, I know that they haven't been allowed to be used in Ontario for years. So,
okay, so it's possible that this was an older investigation.
I'm sure it was. It happened years and years ago. So I just wonder about, farmers of their own, because they want to, at least in my experience, and I grew up on a farm, like Mr. Vanoff did of the official opposition, want to take care of our animals and use best practices for our animals when we were taking care of them. So it got to be years ago, I'm talking 20 years ago, it got to be known that the use of these types of things, stock prize in particular, were cruel. And so their use was discontinued in loading and unloading pigs and animals and all this type of thing. So I just wonder if that's a valid thing to be bringing up all the time. We've heard this all day about this incident that happened with the stock prize. And I think farmers, by and large, have changed their practices and don't use those practices anymore.
Yeah, and that's really fantastic. And this is a specific example of, this was actually our Western Hog Exchange expose, and it was CFIA representatives handing the prods to truck drivers. And it's fantastic that this is no longer allowed. And unfortunately, this is, we're talking about one specific instance of cruelty, and that extends, up till today in various other ways. So while, prods may no longer be legal, a lot of these other practices are, which is a problem.
What other practices are those?
Well, as I have mentioned, No, I do know. In every expose that we've done, serious neglect and abuse has been uncovered in every single expose. So unfortunately, these aren't necessarily, one-off instances.
Oh, I see. So, but these are all old stories, like the one with the stock prod?
They're all what stories? Sorry?
Old stories, like the ones with the stock prod?
Bold stories?
Old.
Old stories.
Yes.
That was a 2014 expose. Every expose that we've released since then has uncovered abuse, cruelty, and the like. So this is not, an incident that only happened once 6 years ago. Unfortunately, these are systemic issues that continue to happen.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I would.
And I will also add, if that's okay, that it's exposes like this that have actually led to things like prods being banned. So that just further highlights the importance of these exposes.
Well, I think as can we get in this? Okay, I had an echo here. I think as over the number of years I've been around a fair amount of time with the animal industry. Practices change as technology changes and all this type of thing. So I would suggest that like you say, we've heard these stories all day about the same stories. You should have all got together, and maybe you'd only say it once. But and these technologies have changed, animal behaviors changed, all this type of thing. And I certainly like to show you our industry that we have out here, where farmers. Barns are clean, they don't smell, animals are content, and all this type of thing. So, because of farmers' ability and want to treat their animals fairly, and in a humane way. So, anyways, those are my comments.
Great. And the last thing I'll just say again is I just want to reiterate that a lot of these practices have changed over the years because of exposes like the ones that we've been mentioning all day. And there's a reason why we're all mentioning the importance of these exposes. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I saw MPP Barrett, your hand was raised. You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and the other people at the witness table. Maybe if I could go up to the first two presenters, Humane Society International, Rihanna, and Chris with the Humane Society of the United States. And I found that interesting. I don't think we've heard much on this with the committee, what has been done in various states in the United States. I think Chris mentioned Utah, I think perhaps North Carolina. There was possibly a court challenge that overthrew this. Just for information of the committee, what other states has similar legislation been overthrown by the court system? I guess that'd be directed to Chris.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, so we have seen laws struck down in Iowa, Idaho, Utah, and there are currently cases pending in Arkansas and North Carolina.
There's 1 minute left.
And just one other quick point I want to make. You asked about the scope of this in the United States, and it has been defeated in red, as we call them here, states and blue states, and it's been opposed by a large variety of nonprofits, including the ACLU, but also the conservative think tank R Street, Amnesty International, the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, Center for Food Safety. So it's garnered tremendous opposition. And I think, one of the reasons that so many in the agriculture community have spoken out against ag bills, and we've gotten dozens and dozens of farmers, is because it sends a message, especially the false pretenses clause, that these farms have something to hide, and it casts a potential negative light. Our former Undersecretary of Agriculture, he said, the industry needs to stop defending the bad actors that are in their business, and needs to stop clamoring for ag laws.
Thank you very much. That's the time for this round. We'll now turn to the official opposition. MPP Vantoff, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for coming here to present today. And I would like to go back to Chris and talk about, if you could expand a bit further on was there a difference in farm perception when the ag-gag laws were first introduced? Did it evolve, or were there, because here farmers seem solidly, quite frankly, farm organizations seem pretty solidly on side. And I wonder, in your experience in the States, was that also the case, and that they slowly came the other way, or did they come the other way?
It's a great question. Thank you. The opposition to these ag laws came from many individual family farmers who highly value animal welfare. HSUS is proud to, we have a wide variety of stakeholders, from vegans to cattle and pork farmers. Many of it, dozens of those folks have spoken out. In terms of the large, groups, that represent more of what you might call factory farms, those groups did this all very kind of quietly. We knew they were lobbying for these measures, in kind of behind the scenes discussions with lawmakers, but they wouldn't really defend it very publicly. And, we suspect because public opinion, when they learned, what the true intent of these bills were, was so firmly against it. And a lot of people, Dr. Temple Grandin, perhaps the world's most well-known meat industry consultant, she said that ag-gag bills were, quote, the stupidest thing that ag ever did, unquote. And she said that because, she believes that the way to build trust with of the agricultural system is to be transparent and to not find ways that are meant to cover up undercover investigations.
Okay. Am I on? Okay.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Thanks for that. And I'd just like to continue. Was there any the customer is always king. So grocery chains, what did they pay any attention to this in the States?
To ag in particular?
Yes.
Yeah. So, the corporations were, hesitant to speak out either way, for fear of, maybe upsetting their suppliers. But we definitely heard, in private conversations, some members of retailers and grocers that were saying that they had a lot of concerns about ag and what it was doing to the reputation of the food industry in general. And also, it's worth noting, as was discussed by Colombe, that investigations have been a big part of the reform of the American egg and dairy industry. And for the positive, we still have a long ways to go. By far, I just, want to make, we don't have it all figured out. We've got a lot of issues here. But, more than 200 companies in the United States have pledged to convert to exclusively cage-free, and similar numbers in terms of converting away from gestation crates for sows. And that is certainly, us animal groups advocated for it, but they wouldn't give us the time of day if they didn't know their customers weren't firmly behind it. And so it's critical that investigations be allowed to occur, so that the public can make an informed decision about what kind of products they want.
Okay. I'd like to switch to Colombe, please. So one of the responses we get from, and I'm a farmer, so I'm pretty married to animal agriculture. But one of the responses we get is, well, we don't need whistleblower, really. We don't, because we have the PAWS Act now. So, that is all going to be solved by one call to pause. And I would like your comments, especially now. I think that people, certainly in Canada and Ontario, have lost quite a bit of trust in the government's ability to react to serious situations, as we've seen in slaughterhouses and in long-term care?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Firstly, I would like to clarify that prods are still legal and able to be used.
Yeah,
Just to leave that
I know that.
clarification. So just, yeah. And then in relation to your question about the PAWS Act, so the PAWS Act, while laudable and a good start, is far too vague and still requires mandated regulations before we can determine its true efficacy. So more robust laws and regulations on animal welfare are needed to ensure the welfare of farmed animals specifically. If the government were properly regulating farmed animal welfare, there wouldn't be a need for exposés by organizations such as ours.
Yeah. Am I on? Yep.
Yes, you are.
Thank you for that. And when the prod discussion was going on, I wasn't 100% sure, but I stopped milking 7 years ago. And the last time that I walked with that, when I was still milking and I walked into the co-op, there were prods for sale. So we didn't use them in our place. But so I really like the issue, and we've heard a lot of great presentations today on both sides, and so a few in the middle, but mostly on our people are picking sides. But and I've said this before, there's two bills, or there's two thought processes wrapped up in this bill. And the one thought process is the farmers need stronger protection from trespassing, and obviously the old trespassing bill, maybe the fines weren't strong enough, or maybe but then the bill veers into the whistleblower part.
You have 1 minute left.
Can we, if we going to Chris, if the whistleblower part was taken out, could this bill go ahead successfully without a challenge, in your opinion, based on your American knowledge?
I would like to say that I am not an expert on Canadian trespass law, and I have not analyzed it sufficiently to know that the trespassing side of the issue. But I would say that the false pretenses sections is a profound concern for free speech rights and whistleblower rights because of the free speech components. Also, why is it just targeting, one sector as opposed to the entire sector? And, in the United States, it's been repeatedly struck down by courts. I obviously don't have the expertise on Canadian courts.
Thank you very much. That concludes this round of questioning. We'll now turn to the independent Green Party member, MPP Schreiner. You have 6.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank all the presenters for coming in today. Your viewpoints are valuable as we consider this bill. I think I'm going to pick up where Chris left off a little bit, just to learn a little bit what's happened in the U.S. So when you've talked about certain farmers and farm organizations, once they've sort of had to deal with the negative public perception of agriculture because of these, quote, ag-gag laws, and they've come to you, did they discuss what the negative implications were? Did it reduce sales? Did it lead to more headaches and aggravation than they had before? What was it that, prompted them to say, you know what, hey, we were asking for this, but we don't want it anymore now?
Yeah, great question. It's very hard to, with something like this, a stimulus, to directly line it up with a downstream effect, like on sales for any particular producer. But I think these farmers have told us that, they're getting that after an ag-gag bill is pushed in their state, that they just feel from talking to the community more distrust of animal agriculture, because it sends the message that industry has something to hide. If you are aimed at, punishing people who conduct exposés on factory farms, that is a major red flag to consumers. So, it's very hard to give really discrete examples of like times that they felt the downwind impacts of these, but they did sense a greater public distrust of their industry, which was very distressing to them because so many of them are trying to do the right thing for animals, aren't afraid of an expose of their farm because they're working hard to do the right thing. So that's why so many of these farmers have really spoken out against ag bills.
So one of the things we hear from farmers here in Ontario, and I hear it in meetings with them, we've heard it today a bit, is that some farm families feel they're being harassed. Sometimes they feel their private property rights are being violated. Sometimes they feel they're upset that their kids see people trespassing on the farm property and they feel afraid. Has there been things that the U.S. has done to address those kinds of concerns while at the same time protecting people's, in our case, charter rights, I guess in your case, Bill of Rights?
Sure. So, in the United States, we haven't seen many of those trespassing bills because they're redundant. Like Canada does, we have anti-trespassing laws already. And if someone did perform an action like that, there would be methods to prosecute. And, we could debate separately the merits of whether somebody should be prosecuted. But regardless, I think, and again, I'm not an expert on Canadian law, but I think, experts like Colombe and Rihanna, and others have argued convincingly that the existing Canadian law already covers trespass. And then when you get beyond that and beyond just making even harsher penalties, that's, you get to the false pretenses section. And, whether it's the intention of that section or, just the effect of that section, it really, the end result is a silencing of whistleblowers.
So yeah, I'm probably close to running out of time, but
You have just over 2 minutes.
Oh, good. So I'm going to direct this question to Colombe or Brian, either one of you, or both. So maybe I'll start with Brian since you haven't had an opportunity to answer a question. What would you say to those farm families who have some pretty emotional feelings of harassment at times, private property violations, etc., who are looking for ways to sort of protect the safety on their farm? Do you have any thoughts about how you would respond to those concerns, given your role as an animal activist?
Thanks for the question. I am an animal rights activist. I would also say my mother was born on a farm in northern Saskatchewan that I visited frequently as a kid. So not an expert on agriculture or anything, but lots of cousins still out in Saskatchewan in agriculture, used to have animals as well. Now they happen to all be in crops instead. But as someone else said before me, I mean, far be it from me to hint or think at all that farmers are bad people or deserve to be harassed. That is not the issue here. We want to express our opinions in a legal way, and certainly if activists do trespass, they can expect that the people they are trespassing against are going to phone the police and so on. If the police are not responding appropriately, that's not the fault of vegans or animal rights activists. And I suppose you should have a discussion about the police budget or police priorities. We certainly don't mean to terrorize, harass, or scare farmers or their children. And that's certainly a regrettable side effect if it occurs.
Thank you very much. That concludes this round of questioning. We'll now turn to the government side. MPP Barrett, you may begin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd like to just finish the questions with Chris with the Humane Society of the United States. And I just found that interesting. Thank you. You listed some of the states. Some of them are pretty big farm states. I think Iowa, Utah, and places like that. So the legislation, was that defeated by lawmakers, or was that defeated by the court system? And would it be at the state court level, or was it under federal law, like their version of a Supreme Court?
Yeah, thank you. So Iowa was defeated by a district court, was overturned by a district court, which is part of our federal court system. And that is also the case for Arkansas and Idaho, Utah and Idaho. And then in terms of, but a lot of other conservative states and big ag states have rejected these in the legislatures. We've seen them rejected by Kentucky and Mississippi and New Mexico and Tennessee, some of these repeatedly. And, these lawmakers, both conservative and progressive, as we call them here, saw this as all of these legislatures are pro-agriculture virtually, but they saw this as a bad mechanism to try to help farmers, because ultimately it does the opposite. It increases public distrust in animal agriculture, and if the public feels in a conservative state or a progressive state that the truth is being hidden from them, and that the public and that the government is giving an unfair protections isn't even the right word, helping cover up concerns to a specific industry. That's why we've seen voters and lawmakers as well as courts reject them.
Thank you very much. Further questions?
Continue, Chair, and the various state, and I have a lot of respect for U.S. farmers and U.S. agribusiness, and much of it. I have a farm. I mean, we run the same equipment and livestock, and product moves back and forth across the border. They have a very sophisticated system down there. In many ways, they feed much of the world. Good, clean, healthy, safe operations, and high quality food, in my opinion. I know we are integrated. Now our laws are different. They have trespass laws. We have trespass laws. That goes back probably several centuries. One difference we have here in the province of Ontario, fairly recent legislation, the PAWS legislation, Provincial Animal Welfare Services Act, which is a very transparent system where the province of Ontario has basically taken over responsibility completely for the protection of animals. And you use the word progressive. I think it is quite progressive legislation. So there's some differences there. And I find in talking about this proposed bill, it's always important to talk in the context of that PAWS legislation and the intent behind that. So I guess my question is, do you have any idea? Like, I don't think the farm practices are that different, but are the laws that different at the state level or the federal level? I mean, we don't have the Fifth Amendment and things like that in Canada, but I guess we have the equivalency. So I'm just trying to learn from the American experience or your American experience.
Sure. Well, unfortunately, and again, regarding how it compares to Canadian law, not my area of expertise, so I defer to Rhian or Colombe or Brian. But in the United States, in the federal level, it's very weak protections, thanks to, have an extremely well-heeled, agricultural system that has ensured that virtually no meaningful protections on the federal level for farm animals, at least when they're on the farm. There is the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, but it covers a tiny portion of animals used for food. Where we're really seeing robust interest in reforms is on the state level. And especially around extreme confinement, battery cages for hens, crating for breeding sows, mother pigs. And, we're seeing states, including ones that are traditionally conceived to more agriculturally friendly or sometimes more conservative, states like Arizona and Colorado and Florida pass laws to crack down on those things. And they're making those decisions in part because exposés have revealed to the public what those conditions look like in reality and how disturbing they truly are. And also enough farmers have testified that they're needless, that animals can be raised in better conditions, profitably. And so exposés have really provided an important source to help move animal agriculture forward in those states. And I think those states that are doing it, we are working at this moment. I'm waiting for my boss to give me an update. We are working with Colorado egg producers to pass a law to require cage-free conditions in the state. And they are excited to work with us because they know that the public wants these reforms. The public wants these reforms in part because of the courageous people who have risked their own safety.
1 minute left.
And, we are, so we're very proud to work with these folks, including some who are considered industrial animal agriculture. Do we agree on everything? No, but we agree on a lot. And we all agree that consumers want kinder treatment for animals. And I see Rihanna has some of that.
Thank you, Chris. I just wanted to quickly add one clarification as well, which is that most provinces in Canada, their animal welfare legislation overlooks farm animals entirely. And unfortunately, Ontario is no exception to that. So even though we've talked about some of the benefits of the PAWS Act, it includes an exemption for generally accepted animal practices on agricultural properties or in the agricultural system. So it's not actually a resource we can look to here to protect farmed animals.
If there are no further questions, that would conclude this round of questions. Thank you. We now turn it to the official opposition. Who would like to begin? Please. All right, MPP Glover, you have 8 minutes.
Thank you. The picture keeps getting deeper and deeper here with all the presentations. So thank you all for being here. Let's see. I'll start with Chris. And you were talking about the Humane Society is now working with egg farmers in Colorado to develop legislation. Can you expand on that?
Sure. So and this isn't the first time, we have already worked hand in hand with egg producers in Washington State, Oregon, Michigan, and Colorado is currently, it's already passed one chamber of the Colorado legislature and is in front of the Senate right now. And so basically we come to them and say, cage-free is better for animals. And they say, hey, this is where our customers are driving us. And both individual customers, like down to the individual consumer, but also companies like Walmart and Target who are responding to their customers are saying, we want cage-free. So the egg producers are saying, our research also indicates animal welfare benefits. There's food safety benefits to that as well, lower rates of salmonella. And we all give, like, HSUS, and Mercy for Animals. We know cage-free doesn't provide, a utopia for hens. And we would like a faster timeline than what these bills are done. egg producers might want a couple of years longer, but we come together, we've found common ground, to give a variety of improved conditions for the hens. And we set a time frame, and they accord with our national egg producers, which is called the United Egg Producers, their cage-free guidelines. So it's, they really appreciate the business certainty that it provides, that they know that they're going to have a specific set of standards by a specific date that they need to accord to. And we appreciate the improvements for animals.
Right. Okay. So I'll ask, there's 3 Canadian deputants here too. So what's being done? Because as John, MPP Ventoff was saying, the customer is king, and farmers, for the most part, the farmers that I've spoken with just want to stay farming, and they're trying to figure out ways to do that and to survive in an incredibly competitive, cutthroat industry where, not cutthroat against each other, but just, being squeezed between corporations on all sides. So are you working with Canadian farmers to change, or with Canadian consumers and farmers to change the landscape so that, legislation to protect animals is not going to be punitive to farmers?
Is this a question thank you for the question. Is this for Colombe or Rihanna?
Rihanna, why don't we start? She put up her hand.
Sure, thank you for the question. Absolutely, we engage with every stakeholder in this process to help drive forward the humane treatment of farmed animals. So that includes consumers, that includes companies, whether it's restaurant companies, retailers, and that includes people within the industry as well. So industry groups that represent the different sectors of the animal agriculture industry, or individual farmers wherever that opportunity arises. And I think there's a lot of opportunity here, as you mentioned, for us to make sure that things are a lot better. There's so much room for improvement. And as a millennial, I can speak to the fact that my generation, we're the largest consumer group globally. And what we are looking for when we make purchasing decisions is our values reflected in those decisions. We want to make sure that we know how things are produced, we understand where our food is coming from, what labor practices are involved, how the animals are treated, how safe everything is. And so being able to see all of that and know that it is well regulated and that there is good oversight is incredibly important. And that's why this bill in particular would be so damaging for consumer confidence in the system.
Okay, and Brianna or Brian, do you want to?
I'll just jump in briefly. I know most of your agriculture sector deputants have spoken in favor of Bill 156, but if you Google, I think as recently as 2013 or 2014, the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, and I think it may have been in reaction to the American developments, the OFA came out and said, we don't want ag-gag laws because they destroy public confidence and they make us look bad. And so we don't want them. Now, I don't know what's happened since then that they've changed their mind, but it does speak to the issue that has been brought up about consumer confidence.
Okay. And Chloe?
Yeah, thank you. I think Rihanna said it really well. I'll add just a few things. Mercy for Animals, our vision is to create a compassionate food system. That includes, of course, the animals that live in our food system, the workers who work for our food system, the farmers, the consumers. So we take a really holistic approach. And to give you an example, for the last 2 years at Mercy for Animals, I worked on corporate welfare policies with organizations as large as RBI across the country on adopting animal welfare policies. So we really do try to work, across the aisle throughout the entire industry with all stakeholders. I mentioned in my opening testimony that in the United States right now, we've just launched our pilot program for the Transformation Project, in which we work directly with contract poultry growers. So we understand this is a very holistic issue, and we really do try to kind of reach across the aisle, work with those that we might consider unlikely allies to help move the system forward in a positive way. And I think that's all I'll add for now.
Okay. And is there any other lessons? So in the States, this seems to have had a negative impact on farmers when this was introduced. Are there any other lessons that we should be drawing from the States when we're considering this legislation here? Chris?
I think the main ones are that consumers want transparency, not what they perceive as cover-ups. And, there are a variety of different ways. We've seen that some in agriculture have tried to suppress whistleblowers, some of which are quite clever. But we would group
1
in
minute
the
left.
false pretenses, clause in with those types of vehicles for trying to pass undercover investigations. But I think trying to suppress undercover investigations. But I think once American voters have really kind of are explained why these measures are so damaging, they oppose them. And I think we have seen a significant decline in bills like the false pretense types of bills over the past few years. And I really believe it's because animal agriculture is really tired of taking a pummeling in public opinion. So, I respectfully, I'm grateful to you all for having me as an American come on here. And it's, of course, up to Canada to decide its own laws. But I humbly suggest that especially the false pretenses clauses is
Thank you
not
very
a
much.
good
That
long-term path for agriculture.
concludes this round. I would like to thank all of the presenters for coming here today and speaking to the committee. It's been a very insightful and informative discussion. At this point, you are released and you may step down. I'd like to now call upon the next group of witnesses. My understanding is that they are all present. So at this point, I would like to ask Alexandra Pester to please begin. Please start by stating your name for the record, and then you'll have 7 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Alexandra Pester. I'm a criminal defense lawyer here in Toronto. I was a law student at the time of Anita Kreinz's trial where she was charged with mischief and ultimately acquitted. And I worked on that case with Mr. Silver and Mr. Grill. I also have extensive experience with animal advocacy. I share the concerns highlighted by a lot of the witnesses that have already testified today. Specifically, I want to adopt Ms. Labchuk's concerns and Professor Lazaire's concerns. Professor Lazaire has outlined beautifully the charter issues and the analysis that I expect to take place when this legislation is ultimately challenged. But there's some additional issues that I'd like to talk about as well. If I can just start briefly, there was a couple of things that came up during the discussion earlier. Someone was asking, I think it was MPP Glover, about criminal harassment in the criminal code. This is an offense in the criminal code if it raises to the level that's captured by the section. It's section 264 if anyone's interested in reading it. But it is a law that exists to protect people from criminal harassment. I'll also point out that there was some discussion about pause and the duty to report. I just want to clarify that pause actually doesn't put a general duty to report on anyone. It applies to veterinarians and not others. So there's three main issues that I want to talk about in addition to that. First, vagueness. One of the examples of vague language used in this bill is the word interact under section 5.2 and 4.4. The former prohibits interference or interaction with an animal being transported without the prior consent of the driver, and the latter prohibits interference or interaction with a farm animal in or on one of the listed areas in the legislation without the prior consent. The word is undefined in the legislation. It could capture and will capture broad amounts of activity. It will impact on currently lawful activities, including protesters that attend public property outside of slaughterhouses and other potentially otherwise innocent activity. It could capture and will capture speaking to animals through the holes of the transport truck, waving to them, potentially taking photos and videos of them. And it will have huge impacts on protesters' freedom of expression and assembly, as Professor Lazaire noted. What about a non-protester who's driving alongside a transport truck? They have passengers in the vehicle and they decide to roll their windows down and wave at the animals or say hello to the animals. That would be captured in this legislation. Or what about an employee who is not an undercover investigator but already works there and decides that they need to capture an image of something that they think is unacceptable, and they start taking photographs and videos? Are they going to be captured by this law because they didn't get consent from their employer first? If there is a deficiency in the method of treatment of animals, even that raises to the level of what's in the criminal code, will these people be prohibited from taking photos or videos or coming closer to see what's going on? Legislation must give citizens notice of what the law prohibits. It cannot be worded in a way where a charge necessarily results in a finding of guilt. The Supreme Court has told us time and again that legislation cannot also be arbitrary. The activities the legislation prohibits cannot bear no relationship to the purpose that it purports to have. This legislation runs a very real risk of being struck down and not in compliance with those principles. A lot of the witnesses have talked about the purported biosecurity purposes and protection of farmers and their families and their staff, but there's no evidence that the way that this bill is worded is going to do anything far and above what is captured already by existing laws to protect farmers and their employees, as well as biosecurity issues. This vagueness, the second issue I want to talk about is the delegation of powers to people that are untrained. So the vagueness becomes more troubling when taken together with how the bill delegates power over enforcement to private citizens who aren't trained to use that kind of authority. First, it does this in providing the power to a transport truck driver to determine when somebody is stopping, hindering, obstructing, or otherwise interfering with a motor vehicle transporting farm animals, or when someone is interfering or interacting with those animals. It gives truck drivers the authority to stop protest activity that they deem to fall within those vague terms. It requires protesters and anyone else to comply, and it's an offense not to comply. Second, the legislation delegates power when it provides the right to owners and occupiers to arrest individuals where they're of the view that the activity is captured by Section 4.4 among other sections of the Act. So back to the truck driver piece. As stated, the potential meaning of interact is expansive. Truck drivers may take one position about what the legislation means, and protesters may disagree about what's captured by that legislation. The bill makes it an offense not to comply. What the law does is it gives truck drivers the power to decide what expressive activity is permissible and what is not. This creates a serious risk of escalating conflict on the ground. What about situations where protesters are picketing on a roadside and wave to the driver or ask him to stop, or are conducting a peaceful picket in compliance with the law, with the other laws, and the driver takes the view that it's obstruction? In Anita Crines' case, she gave water to pigs in distress. The truck driver was already at a light and got out of the vehicle and called her a derogatory name or an offensive name and asked her to stop.
1
are
minute
these the
left.
kinds of requests that protesters are required to comply with? Farmers similarly are going to be given the ability to decide what is captured by this legislation in order to effect citizens' arrests. They're already given the ability to effect citizens' arrests under the Trespass to Property Act, but this law is a lot more expansive. It doesn't require reasonable and probable grounds, and because they're private citizens, the charter is unlikely to apply in most cases. These are things that the police are specifically trained to do, get tons of guidance from the court, and they still get wrong. I'm concerned about this also escalating conflict on the ground. With respect to Mr. Van Thoff's comments earlier about the concern over citizens' arrest, this is a real concern. I'm afraid that if farmers are feeling such pressure and stress about their citizens' arrest provision, there could be real problems. Finally, Section 16 of the bill creates a mandatory...
Thank you very much. This concludes your time. We'll now move to our second presenter, Marina von Kaiserlink. Please state your name for the record, and you may begin. You'll have 7 minutes.
Okay, can you hear me? I'm just sharing my screen.
Yes.
Hold on a second, sorry.
We can, there we go. Thank you.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Marina von Kaiserlink. I'm a professor of animal welfare at the University of British Columbia. And thank you for allowing me to speak. I've been asked to just present some of the research that we did that came about because of the implementation of the ag-gag laws in some of the US states. I am not a lawyer. I'm an animal welfare scientist, but I'm very interested in public trust of farmers. And so we were really interested in whether or not there was counterproductive effects of reduced transparency. So essentially, we asked the question, does awareness of ag-gag laws reduce the credibility of farmers and perceptions of farm animal well-being? Oops. So we did this using Amazon Mechanical Turk, which is an online crowdsourcing platform through Amazon Prime. We surveyed, we did sort of sciencey language. We did a power analysis in order to see how many participants we needed based on our prediction. So we surveyed 716 Americans. This was done, I think, about 2014. So just when the US was really, I mean, there was a number of states that were dealing with the ag-gag legislation. Participants were randomly assigned into either the law treatment, which I put in parentheses as ag-gag, or to what we call the control treatment, which, and this will make more sense in a second, the hay treatment. The control subjects, basically we were looking at providing an information capsule. So we wanted to know what the awareness of the ag-gag laws were, and then when we told them about this, did they change their perception about the law? In the control treatment, we gave them an information capsule, but we just simply told them about hay. And we had edited the informational capsule on the hay so that it was approximately the same amount of words and had the same cognitive load requirements as the ag-gag law. In the term, with those that were in the ag-gag treatment, and I should be very clear here, we never used the word ag-gag because we wanted to avoid any negative connotation. So we continually talked about the law. But they were also given common arguments used on both sides. And then we asked them, those that were just in that treatment, whether or not they supported the law or not. So of the participants that were in the law treatment, only 9% said they had any previous awareness of the law, but when they were made aware of the law, and when we asked them their level of support for the proposed legislation, the majority, 64% stated that they opposed the ag-gag legislation. We then, all participants, whether or not they were in the control hay treatment or whether they were the law treatment, then were put through a previously validated 12-step inventory that assessed their level of trust in farmers as sources of credible information regarding farm animal welfare, farm animal care, and a series of questions about controversial farm issues, including but not limited to the animal welfare. And I can get into the other things that we asked them about farmers as credible sources for protecting the environment and things that are sort of outside of the scope of this right now. Anyways, ag-gag legislation negatively impacted the perceived credibility of farmers and perceptions of farm animal well-being. So here on the y-axis, we have the level of trust from 1 to 4, 4 being basically neutral. The control group were those that got hay, were told about hay. The law treatment had been told about the proposed legislation. And so it tracked really well. We would expect those that had been told about the law to be more negatively impacted in terms of trust. And this tracked really well across political affiliation. So generally speaking, regardless of whether or not we got all the demographics, whether or not they self-identified as Republican, Democrat, or independent, those that were told about the law were less trusting. And indeed, here you can see that, a Republican who read about the law was less trusting than a Democrat that hadn't read about the law. So it tracked really well. And this also tracked across dietary affiliation. So omnivores, generally speaking, we expect them to be more trusting of farm animal agriculture than vegetarians. But even within the group, those that had been informed about the law were less trusting than those that had been told about hay. And again, it tracked really well in terms of place of residence. We expect rural people, citizens to be more trusting of agriculture than those living within urban, with suburban sort of in the middle. But again, even within that demographic, those living in the country that had been told about law were less trusting of farmers than they were than those that had been told about hay. We then asked a lot of questions and where they had to agree or disagree. And this is one where we asked participants about whether or not farmers were trustworthy sources of information. And here again, you can see those that were told about hay were much more likely to agree that farmers were trustworthy sources of information compared to those that had been exposed to the law treatment. This tracked also
1
in
minute
terms
left
of
for your presentation.
Sorry?
Sorry, you have 1 minute left.
Okay, yeah, that'll do. Farmers provide factual information about farm animal welfare was again the same thing. Those that have been given access to hay were more likely to agree that farmers provide factual information. And also that farmers, participants exposed to the ag-gag laws were less likely to agree that farm animals have good lives. This is a bit disconcerting, this slide, because generally speaking, even in the control treatment, we didn't find that they were very strongly in agreement with that statement. Lastly, the take-home points, most people were unaware of ag-gag laws, and learning about them led to the decrease in trust in farmers and an increase in support for animal welfare regulations. This study also provides evidence that awareness of ag-gag negatively impacts perceptions of the current status of farm animal welfare. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to our third and final presenter from the Meat and Poultry Ontario. If we could please unmute all the participants, and if you could please state your names for the record, and you may begin. You'll have 7 minutes for your presentation.